Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on a Wednesday lunchtime in the UK, which is Wednesday and various different times of the day for all these different panelists here and all the people joining us. Thank you to everyone joining us at this time. Really excited to welcome some fantastic speakers, highly knowledgeable about finance for universities globally. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce them. We have Jennie Kent, who is a proud graduate of Northfield Mount Hermon School. She received her BA from Skidmore College, has a Master's in Education from Framingham State, as well as a certificate in Independent Education Consulting from Irvine. She's an active member of her associations, and Jennie is a professional member of the IECA and has served on their Outreach Global and Nominating Committees as faculty for Summer Training Institute, and also co-founded and leads a networking and learning space for newer members. She's a member of NACAC, International ACAC, the HECA, as well as a member of the Small Boarding Schools Association and the Enrollment Management Association. Convinced that transparency, access, and affordability are critical in admissions, Jennie annually compiles important admission and financial aid resources. She is one of the authors of the very famous spreadsheet of financial aid for international students, which we'll be talking about today. We also have Joe Morrison, who is the founder and CEO of Concourse, an online platform on which universities apply for students rather than the other way around, flipping the traditional admissions power dynamic. The company's mission is to increase global access to higher education by making admissions simpler, student-centric, and more equitable. A long-time technology entrepreneur, Joe previously developed computer music software, founded Canadian technology startup eSmith Inc., and built financial trading platforms for banks and hedge funds in New York. After shifting field to education, Joe served as managing director at Grok Global Services, a leading provider of strategic consulting and in-country marketing services for universities. And we also have Joan Liu. Joan has given me a very short introduction to herself. Joan and her teams, the Nepal Justice League and Second Chance team, has successfully seated over 90 international students seeking full financial aid in the post-May the 1st space after the regular US cycle is over. She will share key insights of what she's learned in her 2 decades of work supporting high-achieving, low-income students all over the world. And we also are very pleased to have with us Michael Obeng, who is a student at Hong Kong University, whom Joan and the others know very well, and he will be able to talk about his experiences of getting finance for universities as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Joan. Joan, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jason. It's so nice to be back with you. And I'm so happy to invite you into my house. We span, I think Jennie's in LA, Jason's in England, Joe's in Canada, and Michael is in Hong Kong, and I'm here in Singapore. So we're really glad to be bringing you this kind of global panel on financial aid and international admission. I'm going to share my screen and we can get started. I just want to say thank you to everybody here for joining us and spending some time with us on this very important topic. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I will just share personally that I was a full financial aid student myself in both college and postgrad. My parents, my dad was the first in his family to go to college. My mom was the first in her family to go to college. My dad got a scholarship to Canada and my mom got a scholarship to go to Japan. So I very much feel that even though they were the recipients of that scholarship, that I am the beneficiary. And so anyways, let's get started and let's talk about financial aid and merit scholarships. I want to set an intention for the next hour together. I know that I looked at the list and I can see that, I mean, from the list of places, it's like Cyprus, Togo, China, Turkey, the Philippines, India, England, Vietnam, Pakistan, Switzerland, Macedonia, Qatar, and Canada, just to name a few. And we want to make the best use of this time, but we also know that we can't do everything in 1 hour. So I'd like to set an intention forward, which is we are going to try in this hour to help you make progress in your endeavors to match money to talent. So the students that you work with who want money or who need money, we are going to try very hard to give you some resources, some examples. I really feel so honored to have Jennie Kent and Joe Morrison here, as well as Michael Obeng, to give you a sense of this ecosystem. So whether you're a beginner or whether you're a veteran, we hope that there is some insight or some nugget or some piece of advice that you take away that makes your practice better and that helps you become more of a destiny bender for your students. We feel that this is such an important piece of counseling. So let me just, let's see, go back here. All right, as you can see, I have some technical difficulties here, but let me see if I can go back. All right. I want to talk a little bit, first of all, about the outline of the session. What we're going to do today, we're going to go over, number one, some key concepts in the United States that you have to know because we're going to root this in the United States. Second thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about when students want money. Third thing we're going to do is talk about when students need money. And then we're going to hear from Michael Obeng, who you can see at the bottom of the screen. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. And then when we talk about students who need money and students who want money, I'm going to talk about basically a concept, okay, so some knowledge that you need. Then we're going to give you a case study, an example, a suggested approach, and then also key resources. I mean, one of the reasons why Jennie Kent and Joe Morrison are here is because I wanted to share with you all some really wonderful resources, and the people themselves who have developed those resources be able to show and share with you how exactly they use the resources that they themselves have built. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is the United States, and I want to just give us a bit of a frame when we talk about money. Okay, so in contrast to systems like Singapore or Canada, the United States is very decentralized. There are public higher education institutions, there are private higher education institutions. Some educations get federal funding, other educations set up endowments and get institutional funding. What does this matter to you? It means that there's no centralized system or portal that you can go to look for financial aid or scholarships. You don't have something, for example, like you have in England, you know, the beautiful UCAS system. You don't have something like you do in Singapore, where it's kind of very easy to kind of apply to all 9 public universities here. You have a very decentralized system with 4,000 really different institutions and no central place to go to find out information about financial aid and scholarships, which makes this a really hard type of counseling. The second thing that you need to know about the United States is that this is a context-dependent type of process. So for example, at my school, we run what's called the International Baccalaureate. This is a scale of 45. 45 is the highest that you can get. A 45 in Singapore is not the same as a 45 in Rwanda. So if a student made a 45 at my school, they would be eligible to apply for an Ivy League institution. If they were on a 38, they would be in the middle of the class. However, the one international baccalaureate school in Rwanda had an applicant who applied on a 38 and got into an Ivy League institution. And that was because a 38 at that school was the highest that the school had ever seen. And in fact, the highest that the country had ever seen in regards to the international baccalaureate score. So your merit is kind of dependent upon what available resources there are to you, what curriculum is available to you. This is really different from other institutions in other parts of the world where, first of all, you have to kind of meet a threshold. And you kind of have to have the right curriculum. I mean, if you don't have, I used to work in Turkey, and there were some countries that didn't accept the Turkish lycée. Like you had to have A levels or you had to have an international baccalaureate. So this is a system that really is looking at your context. How do they measure context? Well, everybody who is applying to the United States is required to submit a context document, and that context document is called the school profile. Okay, so we spend hours writing that school profile because we know that students are going to be measured against that profile. Finally, when we talk about money, we're talking about selective admissions. We've got different types of selective admissions. We've got somewhat selective admissions, highly selective admissions, and let's just call it ridiculous, miraculous selective admissions, where it's like 2% admit rate, 100 kids apply, 98 are getting rejected. Imagine if you were to get on a plane and somebody said to you, you have a 98% chance of not making it to the other side of the ocean. When you get on that plane, I mean, this is the level of selectivity that we are talking about when we're talking about financial aid. Okay, all right. Jason, I have a favor. Can we share from your screen instead? Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to.
I am missing slides and I am so sorry, everybody. We're going to stop for 1 second. Maybe Jason, if you wouldn't mind like handling the slide piece of this, because I don't want to miss anything.
No
and I'm
problem.
Sorry, everybody, for this technical difficulty. Thanks for your patience with this. I thought to myself before this presentation, if I was going to have any problems with anything, it would be the slides. So thanks, Jason. Thank you for helping with this.
No problem. That's what I'm here for.
Joan, you're getting lots of encouragement in the chat.
Aw, thanks, guys. Thanks for your patience. Let me see. Let me open up the chat for a second. Yes, put all the questions in the Q&A box, and we will try and answer questions at the end. Thank you, Jason.
You just tell me when to move on.
Okay. So if we could just, all right, this is the outline that I went over, and then could we go to the next slide? We talked a little bit about this, thank you. All right, last thing I wanted to say about the US system is, do you see these two folks? One is like running a race and trying to win the race the fastest, and the other person is the ice skater. If you've ever watched ice skating in the Olympics, selective admissions works more like ice skating. It's not the person who's necessarily the best in class. It's that technical piece, the academic piece, combined with a subjective element. And that subjective element is artistry in the Olympics. And so it's those two things that are being looked at in highly selective admissions in the United States. Thanks, Jason. Next slide, please. Okay, time to talk about cases. We're going to talk about student A who wants money, and then we're going to talk about student B who needs money. If you joined us for the last session in June, you will recognize some of these slides, but we're going to take a deeper dive into this. So we're going to start with student A who wants money. Next slide, please. Okay, let's call this student Jason. Jason is a real student that we worked at my current school. Next slide. Let me explain the concept first, and then we'll get to the example, and then we'll get to suggested approaches and then resources. When a student wants money, so this is a student who prefers to have a more affordable option, but technically could afford the full cost of attendance. Okay, so how can a student who technically can afford the cost of attendance apply for money and get the cost of attendance to be more eligible? Let's call this merit scholarships. I mean, there's a lot of terms that are floating out there like merit aid, tuition discounts, but I'm going to call it merit scholarships because I think this is the best term for it. And with merit scholarships, your eligibility doesn't depend upon documentation that you submit to prove that you are either rich or poor or middle class. It just depends upon like your grades, your leadership, and your contribution. So an example of this would be like the Jefferson Scholarship at UVA, the Moorhead Cain, the Belk Scholarship at Davidson College. There is a range of merit scholarships where it covers all 100% full tuition, room and board, or tuition, but not room and board, or partial tuition, or something even smaller than that, like $1,000 to $2,000 in a bursary. Next slide. So here's an example of the Jefferson Scholarship. I want you all to take a look at this number. The total value of the Jefferson Scholarship is close to $300,000. That's to be invested in one student for 4 years at the University of Virginia. This is a cost of attendance plus scholarship because it says plus coverage of supplemental enrichment experiences. And those experiences would be things like an internship, a research opportunity, summer experiences, the cost of travel to those summer experiences. So this is super ultra robust. Next slide. Okay, so let's say we have a Chinese student and they attend an international school in Singapore. This is actually one of my former students. They are a 40 out of 45. Context-wise, where does that put that student in the class? This is really important. The top 25% of the class, not the top 1%, not the top 5%, not the top 10%, but the top quarter of the class. They are in general an A- student. A 40 out of 45 is basically a very good student overall. And they have very good community service. They're performing arts. They play the violin, and they are nationally competitive. They play in the National Singapore Youth Orchestra. And then they've got some leadership at school. Next slide. Okay, the student and the family, they come to you and they say, oh, school counselor, where do I apply? And I want a list from your office. Can you give me a list? And my question to you is to think a little bit about, what is your responsibility here? What do you do? How much time and resources do you put into this? Just think a little bit about like how you would handle this situation. Okay, next slide. Okay, what I would recommend that you do is not to hand out a list, but rather to be a facilitator and to give some direction to this and to allow the family to do the research and to set that expectation at your school. Because imagine if you had 50 students coming to you for this and 50 students wanting like a personalized list. This would be almost an impossible ask. But students who have the resources to do this, their parents are often involved and the family can kind of take over. So I would recommend like a mix of public and private schools, public higher education institutions because they have a lower cost of attendance overall, and private institutions because they generally offer big scholarships. Students can also apply to automatic scholarships. They can apply to the competitive scholarships that we just talked about. But no matter what a student does, the student needs to be at the top of the pool. How do you know if a student is at the top of the pool? Because every single institution in the United States publishes what's called a school profile, and they'll tell you, they'll give you some signals. Here's the middle 50% of the GPAs. Here's the middle 50% of the SATs. Here's the number of students that we take from the top quarter of the class. You can kind of determine and estimate, and that's kind of your role as a counselor, to kind of look over the list, recalibrate, make some suggestions, say, well, you might want to have some more publics on this list, or if you do happen to know of a scholarship, say, well, you might want to look at this particular scholarship. But in general, you're kind of facilitating and kind of offering direction. Next slide. So what did this student do? If you can look here, they did do a bunch of publics. They did do some privates. The privates at the bottom, as you can see, there were some hefty scholarships, like it's an $80,000, $85,000 scholarship from the private universities. And then you've got a range of scholarships that you can see that this student got from public scholarships. And you can kind of look at this and think, oh, okay, I wonder what is going to be the cheapest option in the end, because affordability is this particular family's desire. Okay, so next slide. If we break it down, so you've got the total cost of attendance, the scholarship, and then the cost of attendance after scholarship, you can see that this particular student is going to go then and is at actually University of Florida. They got a big scholarship at University of Florida, a public institution that was lower cost, had a lower ceiling. And they're going to pay, instead of $160,000, a quarter of that price. And so that's where the student went. Okay, next slide, please. Now, you can have kids apply to universities. Like these kids can be like, okay, I'm going to do a list. I'm going to do the research. I'm going to and this family did a ton of research. Like we worked a year and a half on that list. Or you can have universities apply to students. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Joe because I want you all to understand that there's kind of two ways of doing this now. We didn't have this available to us 10 years ago, but we do have it available to us now. And I often use this method. And so that's why I asked Joe Morrison to be on this call. Joe, can I pass this over to you, please?
Sure, that sounds good. So right, Joan has talked about the whole point of this is how can we connect talented student financial opportunities? And so one way of going about it is you can research what scholarships are available and apply for institutions and scholarships, or you can flip it around. That's something that we've built in this concourse tool. And essentially the idea is that you showcase your students anonymously. And so you showcase their grades, you would showcase their interests and provide information about their budget. And then you would invite universities to apply for them by offering admission and scholarships. So if you go to the next slide, I'll show you what one of these looks like. So as a counselor, you would work with your student to build a profile, something like this. So you can see there's a section to showcase grades, GPA. You can provide documents up front, or you can start with no documents. And then this is kind of an interesting student. You can see that the student's interested in economics, political science, marketing, and other areas. And there's a place for the counselors, if you're working with your students, to put notes about the student. So this is a real profile, actually. They're supposed to be anonymous, although when the counselors add notes, we suggest that they don't reveal the name of the student in those notes. And in this case, because the counselor did put the student's name in, we actually changed the name of the student in the high school here, but otherwise it's a real profile. So this profile actually attracted some impressive offers, a total of 7 admission offers and 486,000 in scholarship offers. If you go to the next slide, I'll show you what a couple of them look like. Yeah, so this is basically screenshots of what the student and counselor see. Basically, you create the profile, you click a button saying, okay, I'd like to be reviewed for admission offers. And you can see one institution offered admission and guaranteed annual scholarships of 36,500, conditional on the student submitting academic transcripts from the counselor. So the institutions can put conditions in there. 2 of them were unconditional, one for 30,000 a year and one for 27,000 a year. Pretty hefty scholarships, and this wasn't all of them, but it gives you a sense of kind of what some of them look like. And one of the things that's important about this model is that universities are encouraged to make offers that students can afford. If the student has an EFC of under 5,000, there's not much point if the tuition is over 60,000 and the scholarship is very small. It's not going to be useful for the student, and it's not really going to be worth anybody's time. So institutions are encouraged to say, like, look at the student's budget, offer a scholarship that will make your program affordable to the student. And so it's a nice model. Universities will look at the total picture and make these offers. And the other thing that's important about it is that the student is anonymous at this point, because you want to see, like, what am I eligible for here, without necessarily putting your personal information out there. We need to protect privacy of the students. So as the offers come in, you as counselors can work with your students to go through them together and decide which ones they want to express interest in. And you can selectively share your personal information with the offers you want to explore. And even there's no commitment required. You can book meetings with the universities and ask questions about the offers. Parents and counselors are welcome to come to those meetings. So it's a nice discovery process. And really the worst thing that could happen is if your budget is really tiny or you have a lot of constraints, the worst thing that can happen is you might not get any offers. But most students get something on the platform, and the amount of effort is pretty low and the cost is low. It's a free platform for counselors and high schools. One thing that's important to note is full scholarships are rarely given out on this platform. So if a student has 0 EFC, this is probably not going to solve that problem. Joan's going to talk about that in a minute. But for students trying to match a modest budget and cast a wide net and just find out, like, what's out there that I might be able to afford and what scholarships can close the gap, this kind of reverse admission model that we have in Concourse is a good solution.
And Joe, can I just add one thing?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so guys, like, you know, with my student, like, he paid like application fee after application fee after application fee after application fee, right? Like, you got 10 schools and they're each costing $70, and it's $700 just to apply for a financial scholarship. And Joe, as I understand your platform, like, basically you pay once, like, you pay one fee, basically the equivalent of one application fee, and then basically 70 or 80 universities, or I don't know how many schools you have on your platform, I think somebody just asked, or 100 universities basically can apply to you, correct?
Oops. Yes. Sorry, I was trying to post a link and I put the wrong link out there. Here, this for anybody who's interested in an account. Right. There's a fee of $75. Student pays one time to attract offers, but actually in many cases we waive that fee if the student is in financial need, or if counselors want to work with an entire class. We have a few different programs where there's actually no fee at all on the counselor and student side. Or the students, if it's just 1 or 2, the student would pay $75 one time. And the number of universities jumping on the other side of the Concourse platform is increasing every month. We launched about a year ago with 20 universities, and now we have 70 actively making offers on the platform. And the more universities that participate, the more scholarships are getting offered.
Okay, thank you, Joe. And they're from like 6 different countries or something like that, right?
Yeah, a lot of it's kind of US centric. So I'd say out of the 70 or so universities, probably 30-ish are in the US, maybe more. But we also have institutions in Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, making admission offers on Concourse. So as counselors, you can work with your students to put in, you know, here are the destinations that I'm interested in or open to. You know, you put in your grades and everything you want to showcase and what you're looking for, and then let the universities come to you.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Thanks.
So for example, I have a student from India that I'm working with pro bono, and he needs a full scholarship. So I put this student on Concourse, and he already has some scholarship offers from Canada. I mean, and these are schools that he would never have thought to apply to because we just didn't know. I mean, there's no way a counselor can know all of the scholarships that are out there. And so anyways, that takes care of students who want money. So as you can see, there's kind of 2 ways to do that. And I hope that that gives you a sense of that particular demographic of student. Okay, we're gonna move forward now to the next slide, and we're gonna talk about a student in regards to a student who needs aid. Okay, now this is the kind of student who is, I'll call it a zero EFC student, just for the purposes of this discussion, a student who doesn't have the money to attend university, maybe even in their own country. This type of student is looking for access. So let access and affordability be the compass here. Next slide, please. So counselors, we work with a whole bunch of students who want a bunch of different types of futures. I mean, at my school, we work with medics, kids who want to be social scientists, like, you know, everybody's got kids who want economics or psychology, students who want to be prospective barristers, solicitors, lawyers, kids who don't know what they want to do. They just want to do a liberal arts program. We also work with kids who are pre-professional, like kids who want to be an architect or an engineer or a physiotherapist. I have had 2 kids who want to be vets. I have 1 kid in my caseload this year who wants to be a pilot. I have no idea how I'm going to manage that one. And then we have also student athletes and full financial aid kids. And I would say of the types of counseling that are out there, full financial aid kids, it's the hardest type of counseling that there is. It's kind of like an art and a science. You're like a coach and a mentor and a talent broker and an advocate all mixed into one. It's very different from working with a kid who doesn't need any money. For my students who don't need any money, I'm basically a facilitator, but I know that they will have choices. You know, they'll pick between 2 really good choices at the end if their list is okay. But for full financial aid kids, they might end up with nothing. And so I spend a lot of time worrying about them. In many ways, they're kind of like student athletes. This is also a situation where you're trying to match talent to money and a great program. It requires a very kind of high touch, in my opinion, in order for this to be a very successful process. Next slide. You're working with some very challenging parameters. I mean, it's a very difficult kind of space, in my opinion, because okay, if we were to estimate what percentage of the US higher education market offers like the full cost of attendance, this is less than 1% of the market. Of the 4,000 schools that are out there, there's very few that offer everything. And when I say everything, I also don't mean indirect costs. I mean, you still have to have a student who somehow can manage to get to the school, pay for visa, pay for SEVIS. Did you know that your scholarship gets taxed about $1,500 if you are on a full scholarship in the United States? Immunizations, like those type of indirect costs aren't covered by the full cost of attendance. So it's a really small market. And then within this market, it's a very competitive market, and applicants have to be exceptionally competitive. I heard a phrase this summer, and I think it really stayed with me because it's not just best in class, everybody. It's best in career. We're talking career standouts are the types of kids who are going to be competitive for this type of process. Next slide. So I'm going to give you again, the same sort of thing that we did last time, the concept, the examples, some resources. We've got Jennie here who's going to talk about her incredible lists. So here are the ways in which a full financial aid student can get money. There's 4 buckets in my mind, okay? This is like reductionist, but in general, there's 4 buckets. There's one, which is the merit scholarships. We've already gone through that, right? Like UVA, Thomas Jefferson, that's like one type of scholarship. Then we've got 3 others. And I'm going to show you some language in the next couple of slides that show you like these other types of buckets. And this is the language that's kind of used, and it's a mouthful. It's like need aware and meets full need, need blinded meets full need, hybrid scholarships. So if we go to the next slide, we have an example of bucket number 1, okay, the Moorhead Cane. We provide a 4-year fully funded educational experience for students of the highest caliber at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. You do not have to submit documentation to prove that you need financial aid, okay? The second bucket, which is the next slide. All right, I want you to look at this really carefully. This is a need aware and meets full need. So this is for Haverford College. Look at the first sentence here. Financial aid will have their demonstrated need met. How do you demonstrate need? You have to submit documentation like the CSS profile, or in the past, it would have been something called the ISFAA, that financial documentation to prove that you want to apply to qualify for aid. Okay, so people look at your assets, they look at how much money your parents earn, they look at how much you have in savings, they look at like your expenditures, and they kind of try to figure out, do you really have the need that you say that you have? And then they will meet the need that they determine that you have from the documentation that you provide. Okay, now, look at the very bottom of this slide. Financial aid does not cover, okay, this is what I was talking about, indirect costs, international travel expenses, living expenses for periods when the college is not in session, so on and so forth. Okay, the next slide, please, is the third bucket. This would be the, okay, can we just move to the next slide? Need blind. MIT, there's 5 institutions in the United States that are need blind. It means applicants will not be disadvantaged in the admissions process because of their financial need. One of 5 schools that's need blind. Okay, Jason, can we go back one slide, please, now? All right, what does this mean exactly, like need blind versus need aware? Okay, keep going back. Okay, there's 2 types of institutions, need blind admission. Okay, so this is like MIT, Harvard, Princeton, Amherst, Yale, where you have need, but it's not going to impact whether or not you get admitted. Okay, so need aware impacts whether or not you're going to be admitted. That means that the more money you need, the harder it is for you to get in. So if you're a full pay student, you might have a different admit rate. You will have a different admit rate than a student who has a 0 EFC. That student who has a 0 EFC, their chances are significantly harder in terms of getting the aid that they need and admission to your institution. Okay, next slide. We've gone over this. And then the 4th bucket would be hybrid. So this is from the University of Minnesota, and they've got, as you can see in the first sentence, a combination of like merit and need. And they can like, usually there's somebody at the institution who's piecing these things together. And so in my own career, I've seen that like this can really work if there's an individual who really cares. Like, so like I can literally think in my mind of 2 people who basically worked at public institutions and would literally just like grab from different pots of money, piece it all together, and it would cover the full cost of attendance. And that is the beauty of this industry. There are people in this industry who will do that. So it's kind of not dependent just on the institution, but also on the person who's working in the office. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, all of this is to say that it's difficult. Okay, like I hope that you're taking away from this that this is kind of like the Hunger Games. It's difficult to get admission, even if you are a student of the highest caliber. And that is why we've got Katniss here, because it's very much like, I think, almost like the Hunger Games when you are a student who has very high need. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our example. Okay, we've done the concept. We're going to go on to the example. We've got engineering. This is a student who has 7 A1s on the West African Secondary School Certificate examination. The student gets in the top 5% of the nation, okay? Like blows it out of the water. This is a national exam. It's like the Gao Cow. All right, then on the SAT, 1560, on the first time that the student takes this examination, okay? And the student is from a public school in Ghana, doesn't even attend an international school, okay? So think about those resources there. The student gets an 800, 800, 800. Again, the very first time that he takes the test, he participates in something called the National Math Science Quiz. You have to be picked out of the nation to do this. And they usually pick about 9 kids. So he's one of the 9 kids out of all of Ghana who gets picked to go to this National Math and Science Quiz. And he's the only junior in this group, which is quite an extraordinary achievement. He's also the winner of Ghana's next Einstein competition. And this is just some of his achievements. I mean, I haven't put in all of his achievements. Next slide. All right, if you haven't heard of the National Math and Science Quiz, it is a big deal. Like in Ghana, people rally, it's like a big sports thing. They fill up like huge stadiums and public spaces to watch this. BBC even did a series on it because it is an enormous deal to be in the NMSQ. The students who get to this point, they're put under like lights, there's a moderator, people are cheering in the stands. It's a little bit insane. When I first saw this, I thought, oh my goodness, like I don't even know that there's something I could compare this to as an American. The closest thing I could think of was the Westinghouse, which isn't actually that public a competition, but is as competitive. Next slide, please. Okay, so this student is actually none other than Michael Obeng, who is here. I mean, he knows that we were going to talk about him. You can see Michael 2 years ago. He's the student who is to our far right, and he was the only junior in the group. He was 1 year younger than anybody else, and then he also made the NMSQ his senior year again. Okay, next slide. I want you to think about where should Michael apply? Like, let's say you're his counselor. You've got this enormous talent in front of you. Michael's parents aren't involved in the process. Oftentimes with a 0 EFC student, the parents aren't involved, or sometimes the parents don't speak English. Sometimes the parents are also, I mean, I had a student who was Cambodian. We asked them to sign the CSS profile and they couldn't sign the name because they were illiterate. They hadn't been taught to read and write. And so you got this student who's first gen, who has all of this potential. You've got a national winner on your hands. Where does this kid apply? What do you do as the counselor? So think a little bit about, like, how would you guide the student? Would you make suggestions? Would you tell the student to do it on his own? Like, what exactly would you do with this incredible person who is sitting in front of you? Okay, next slide, please, Jason. So this is where, okay, Michael has given us permission to share this with you. This is where Michael applied, okay? And Michael, to his credit, did not have a lot of resources in regards to counseling. And yet he found all of these schools on his own and he applied to them. And he applied to about 20 schools. Okay, and as you can see, he applies to 2 buckets. The buckets are the need aware meets full need bucket and the need blind bucket. And as we know, it's admissions Hunger Games. Michael is also engineering. I want to say that engineering is really hard. Pre-professional, like architecture, engineering, you've got financial aid kids, and then you've got financial aid kids who want this level of specification. There's just not that many institutions that do that. So the smart thing that Michael did was he applied to some liberal arts colleges here who also, they don't offer engineering, but they offer physics. Or they offer, for example, a blend. Lafayette, I think, is a really good choice because it offers both engineering and liberal arts and is a blended school. I mean, there's only a couple of these schools in the United States. He unfortunately does not get into any of these schools. He is denied to all of the schools on the left. He is waitlisted at Caltech and University of Chicago. And on March 30th, next slide, please, we saw in one of the college Facebook groups, one of Michael's, I think this was Michael's SAT tutor. I know, Michael, that you had gotten like a SAT pro bono help in Ghana. And so your pro bono SAT, I think the person who was running the SAT Center posted this on one of the Facebook pages. And this guy is like, he's just like, what's going on? I mean, I have this kid in front of me, like, here are all his rejections. He's waitlisted at Caltech and University of Chicago. Like, what do we do? He said, I'm taken aback. This is one of my top students. This is like a heartbreaking situation. Like, folks, help, okay? And then in the next slide, you can see also how he says at the very end of his text here. Next slide, please. At this point, and you can actually see all of the achievements. Like, as I said, Michael was not just a nationally competitive student. He was like in Model United Nations, the Youth Association, African Science Week, editorial board, community work, the Rhesus Foundation. And so this person says, what went wrong? How can you get off the wait list? So we were tagged on this post. I run an initiative called the Second Chance, where we basically take students who don't get in during the course of the regular year, and we support them in trying to find a full scholarship in the post-May 1st space. And I want to show you some of the comments that were in response to this. So if you can go to the next slide, Jason. For example, this is something that you don't see, but that is unofficial information. People don't generally publish this, and I've blocked this out. Our admit rate for regular decision for international students seeking financial aid was less than 1%. This is a need-aware, meets full need institution that Michael had applied to. Early decision gets you into the 5 to 10% admit range. So I always recommend early for students like yours. Otherwise, regular is nearly impossible, even with perfect stats, resumes, essays. Next slide. Another person jumps in from a need-aware meets full need institution, liberal arts college on the East Coast. Even those credentials may not make the cut at those schools. Financial aid for international students is very limited. This year at our school, our admit rate for international students seeking aid was under 3%. Nothing, actually, nothing deficient in his application. So this is the level of competition that students are up against. Okay, Jason, next slide, please. Okay, what what could the student have done? What is the counselor's role? Like, could there be another way in which to approach this? Like, what do we do when a student doesn't really have, for example, the benefit of a counselor who knows this space, the student themselves, they're struggling, they're like on the internet, they're trying to Google all of this. Okay, next slide. You all are in this space because you are in a role that can actually make a difference for a student like this. And I would say the most important thing for a student with this level of talent is the list. It comes down to the list. When you have a student who is this talented, the list has got to be diverse, and you want to try as hard as you can to maximize their chances. Do not let, if a student comes to you and they say, I want to apply to X school, and that school can only cover tuition, but they cannot cover room and board, do not let the student apply. I was in Rwanda a couple of years ago, and there were students who approached me in May, and they said, well, I applied to this school and I applied to that school, and I only got full tuition, but now what do I do? Can I negotiate with these schools? And my heart broke, because I thought, you should never have applied to those schools in the first place. Those schools were never structurally going to be able to offer you a viable offer. So first rule is don't ever let the student, if apply to schools that cannot cover the full cost of attendance if their EFC is $0 to $5,000. Okay, next list, or next slide. As you can see, the counselor's role here is a critical role, because you are not in the same role as you're in when you're working with a full pay student, where you can just kind of facilitate and kind of check a list, and you know that the student is going to be okay no matter what. I mean, this is in my opinion, the role is more like almost like you could actually change the trajectory of a student and their family generationally. You could help a student gain global mobility to a third country. You could negotiate for this student and be their third party advocate. So, okay, how exactly do we do that? Next slide, please. All right, so here's another way to do the list. I mean, hindsight's all 20/20, right? But here's another way in which to do the list. And Michael knows this because we kind of have already taken him through this. But for example, use all 3 rounds. Use ED1, use ED2, use RD. Some people will disagree with me about this, but I really, really believe in this. If you are an institution and you are going to spend $250,000 on a student, wouldn't you rather make sure that that student is yielded? Like, if you're going to offer that money to somebody, you want to know that that kid is going to come to your institution. The only way to do that in terms of enrollment management is to do that through early decision. So use all 3 rounds. Do early decision 1, early decision 2, and regular decision. So for example, this could be a possible alternative University of Chicago ED1, okay? We know that that's kind of viable because we know that, for example, I mean, in hindsight, Michael was waitlisted there, right? So ED1, when you get a waitlist, you can think to yourself, okay, maybe that would have been a good choice. Lafayette, maybe ED2, because Lafayette is a little bit less selective. So if you don't get into the University of Chicago, maybe you can get into Lafayette. I mean, when I say less selective, I'm still talking to the Hunger Games though. And then also other buckets. So in green, I have another bucket, public institutions that basically are automatic merit. These 2 I put up here because they basically, if you have a 1450 and you've crossed that threshold, you're eligible for a presidential scholarship. And then, for example, University of Richmond, which is a hybrid. So we've got now our need-aware schools. We've got bucket number 2, bucket number 3, or excuse me, bucket number 1, bucket number 2, bucket number 4. And then we've also got another bucket, which we haven't talked about, which is outside the United States. I would say that at this point, with COVID happening, really the student needs to be casting a wider net. So what are some schools that maybe, could also be on the list? Something like NYU Abu Dhabi. Jacobs University in Germany, where students, can get a full tuition, but they can also easily work for living expenses. SUNY Korea, which is an American institution. I mean, that's the SUNY system, and then maybe Hong Kong University, something like that. So basically the list is broader, it's more diversified. I think need-blind institutions are really hard. I mean, Harvard is really hard to get into. So this is another way to do it, okay? Next slide. We're going to break this down now because we did promise 5 things that you can do. And I want to make this really explicit in everybody's brain, okay? Like in terms of like, what are you doing as a counselor in terms of helping a student match talent to money? So the first thing that we're doing with this case is we're thinking, okay, academic potential and performance. Like, is this student a standout in terms of their career? Second, is there really financial eligibility? Like, do we have signals from the student that the student really does need money? The way in which we do that is we require the student to turn in the CSS profile. So the same way that you are requiring students to turn in things like questionnaires and like peer recommendations and like other types of things. In our office, we require this in grade 11 because we want to know exactly what's going to go on in regards to the money situation. It's not enough to kind of take a student's word for it. We look at the documentation. You look for signals on that financial documentation. One really obvious signal would be, there's no money being spent on holidays, pets, entertainment, all those buckets within the CSS profile, they're all blank. On occasion, I have had students who I have no idea, kind of what their circumstances are, and they're coming to my school here and they're living like somewhere else in Southeast Asia. Occasionally I've said to them when I'm first getting to know them, can you show me your house on Google Earth? I had this one student from Cambodia show me her house, and I thought like house is in, like, I'm thinking of my reference point is the American context. And she showed me like an aluminum put together shack without a doorway in the front of this shack. And I thought, okay, she's not even a 0 EFC student. She's like a -5,000 EFC student. Like, that's how I understood that her financial eligibility was through a picture, quite frankly. Okay, the other thing that you're doing when you're looking at the student's chances is you're looking at community impact. Is this a student in ruthless terms that a university would invest a ton of money in? Think about, for example, precedent, change, and impact. The US Set and Trust program in the UK used to use words when they were training all the students about this, like only, best, and first. Okay, is this the student who is the only one in the school who has done this? The first one who has done this in their community? The best one? Again, we're thinking like career standout. Next slide. Okay, all right, this is a little bit controversial. I would say as a counselor to be a bit of a dictator, like tell the student what they can and can't do. I have said to students in the past, no, you cannot apply to NYU, early decision. NYU doesn't have the aid. And we'll fight back and forth about it. Oh, but I just want to see, there's no space to see. There's so much at stake for you. No, you can't do that. And whereas another student, I would probably say, yeah, that's fine. You can see. I feel like there's too much at stake here. So really learn the market, understand the US higher education financial market, money market. And also, if there is one resource you can use, like if I was on an island and I could only pick one list, it would be Jennie Kent's list. Jennie Kent's here. She's going to talk about this list in a minute. Okay, next slide. Okay, when you advocate for the student, I mean, we haven't talked so much about this. This could actually be its own session. One of the things you want to do in your counselor recommendation is you want to think, everybody think about somebody in your life that you dearly love or that you dearly admire. And think about how you would describe them to your mother or your father or your best friend. And think about those things that are very specific to that person, like so idiosyncratic to that person, that go beyond things that you could use to describe everybody. So like intangibles that go beyond, this is a determined student, this is a conscientious student. Think about almost like X factors. Really listen and really kind of try to zero in on what makes that student special and how you can translate that into language. So I had a student many, many years ago. She was a Vietnamese refugee. Her name was Lee Tran. She sat in my class, and I was always, beyond being determined and conscientious, she had this ability to see beauty in the ugliest things. And I'm talking really ugly things. Like we were reading The Bluest Eye, and she could even see the beauty in the most criminal people in that book. And I was just always so struck by that. So think a little bit about like, what would you say about this kid to your best friend? And if you don't know what that is and you can't get it out of the kid, consider asking the kid to ask one of their friends to write you a little rec about them. Or for example, there are some students who are introverts and they just can't talk about themselves. Fine, then just say, okay, can you just show me something that, Michael did not actually say to us what his strengths were. Michael was so humble. We went on YouTube, we watched all of Michael's videos, and we were like, oh, okay, we can see what Michael's about, because Michael had a presence about him in the NMSQ that was just incredible. It was like almost biblical, quite frankly. So think a little bit about how to present that student. Always present the student as their strengths first, and then if they've got difficult circumstances, push those difficult circumstances at the bottom of the rec, versus having them be at the very forefront. If you start off with, well, the student is coming from a household of, abuse and trauma, and I mean, it will seem almost like a charity case. So I think a stronger narrative is to bury that more towards the bottom. Jason, next slide, please. Again, use all 3 rounds. Okay, ED2, go lower. Go lower, folks. Like, if the signal is you didn't get into ED1, you've got to go lower. You've got to go to a school where you think that they even have a better chance. The answer, I'm always surprised. People are like, oh, I didn't get ED1 to University of Chicago. Now I'm going to try Princeton ED2. That's not what you should be taking away from ED1 if you don't get into University of Chicago. Because if you don't get into University of Chicago, you're not getting into Princeton ED2. Okay, so we want to kind of think about this as like stages. All right, next slide. It's a picture of Mount Everest. Oftentimes there are things, you've gone through all of this, right? Like, you've helped the kid, you've done the list, you've coached him, you've written your recommendation, you like looked over all of the documentation from the student, you've helped the student with their essay, and then there's like this final hurdle. And it's at the end of the year and you're tired. Like, what do you do? And these often have to do with indirect costs. So I think the last thing I would just say is keep going. So here's an example from the next school, which is from Laysan American School. This is a counselor who had a kid who has a gap at the end. And the counselor is just like, okay, what can we do to figure out this gap? Let me do a tiny little GoFundMe. Let me get some frequent flyer miles. Let me get the tech department to give her a MacBook. Like, let's close that gap. And then the next slide, we have another counselor who is from Canada, and they had a gap as well. And he went to his board and he said, look, this is her gap. Like, is there anything that we can do? And I understand this is a big ask on all of us to close the gaps. But on the other hand, you don't want $2,000 or $5,000 to stand in the way of a student getting a $250,000 scholarship in the States. Next slide. The best resource out there is Jennie Kent's list. I have been such a big fan of Jennie Kent's list for like years, and she's here. She's gonna talk about her list a little bit. Everybody, Jennie Kent.
Hi, everyone. Joan, I'm such a fan of you too. I feel like I made it to the big leagues because I get to present with Joan, and Joe, who I love the hack on the admission process. Next slide, please. I really cannot take credit for the chart that Jeff Levy and I make every year, other than the fact that this is how we spend our summer inputting data. We actually have to dig through all of the common data sets and enter everything by hand. So, it's something that we just think is so valuable. But actually, Doug Thompson did this before I did. It was a similar chart, a little different. And when I started out, I was so frustrated and so annoyed at just the lack of transparency that there was about financial aid for international students, and so many myths floating around out there. And I used Doug's chart, and then he didn't produce it for a couple of years. And I thought, I gotta have the chart. So that's how it came about, not an original idea at all. Next slide, please. So this is what the chart looks like. You can find the chart on our website, Big J Educational Consulting. I'm sure you can just like pop it in Google. It's everywhere. Please use the chart. Please share it with families. Basically, so what's in the chart? These are much like college admissions, very subjective list, right? What are the schools that we picked on the chart? As much as I hate rankings, we know that international families look at them. So we're looking at top 100 schools in US News, top business schools, top engineering programs, CTCL schools, and frankly, any university that gets in touch with us that would like to be included and is willing to send us their common data set, we will include in the chart. So what does it have? It has the schools, it has the total cost of attendance for out-of-state or international students, the number of undergraduates, the percentage of international students, which I think is really important, because very often the more willing you are to be a unicorn, the more money there is. If you are not, say, a top academic achiever. And then the really, really critical columns, which are, what are the aid policies for the schools, right? So you're going to be able to tell right away, okay, does this institution offer need-based aid? Do they offer merit aid? Do they offer no aid? I talk about Boston College a lot. It's really popular in the geographical region in which I work, and they don't offer aid. So why take the time and, every type of resource, time, money, effort, to put into something that isn't going to yield. And then after that, we put in the average financial aid award, as well as the percentage of international students who are receiving these awards. You are going to see numbers occasionally over 100%. Those are not typos. We take these numbers directly from the institutions. We will only accept the common data set, which is a set of information that all the institutions have to give out. The common data set is not a snapshot of an institution. It's more of a collage. Different people are inputting data, and occasionally they don't input it correctly, or there's a typo. When we get in touch and ask about it. But, it's 3 requests go out to every institution if we can't find their common data set. So it's very time consuming, and we can only kind of do so much. Next slide. I'm speaking quickly because I know time is of the essence here. Okay, so how do you use the chart, right? You know where to find it. How do you use it? So very first thing, back to what Joan was saying, is the student a student who will qualify for need-based aid? Is it just a student who isn't going to qualify for need-based aid, but their family has no intention of spending the astronomical amounts of money that U.S. institutions, are charging? Or, do you need a hybrid approach, like Joan said? So basically, that's really your first moment. And I'm a big believer in fit, but the very first piece of fit that I look at with families is financial. Because if you're not looking at finances first, you're doing a really big disservice to the families. So the very first thing I do is, let's figure out, okay, what type of aid are you eligible for? What can you look for? Obviously, a competitive applicant who has financial need should consider the institutions that offer need-based aid. And every student should consider an institution that's generous with merit. Next slide, please. Okay, so basically, who is generous with need? As Joan already pointed out, highly selective schools that are need-based for domestic students very often are need-based for international students. So we're talking about, the top tier. I loved that Joan used that Olympic slide at the beginning, because what I say to my students are, the Ivies are always the academic Olympics. Everybody's been working for it their whole life, and the day of the competition, anything can happen. So I very much, that slide resonated with me. Many of the small selective liberal arts colleges as well. And many of them have awards that range from $40,000 to $60,000. Next slide. Okay, so I just pulled out some stars just as like an easy thing. What I recommend everyone do, however, with the charts, and there's also a chart for domestic students as well as an ED chart, which can be helpful for that approach that Joan says of using every round. Download the chart, pop it into Excel or Numbers, whatever you want. It's a Google Sheet right now, so that you can sort it, right? Because that's great if you just know how to sort. And if you don't, watch a video, learn, it will save you so much time. It is well worth it. Okay, so need-based stars: Amherst, Yale, Harvard, Dartmouth. You know, these are schools that consistently are supporting under-resourced international students. There are some outliers that I think are important to point out. You know, Barnard, sure, it's a large amount, but 8% are getting it. Georgetown, same thing. WashU, Emory, Oxford, right? Those percentages are so low. I mean, your chances are just insanely small. So, you know, as Joan said, I actually totally agree with her dictator approach. You know, be firm with the students. Numbers don't lie. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm not even sure why this slide is in here. So next slide. I know it's need-based. Yeah, it's very, okay, go back, please. It's very hard for me to, I don't have my slides in front of me, so I'm just relying on whatever pops up on the screen. Okay, here you can see I did one of those sorts that I told you about. So you can see that I sorted the chart according to need-based, right? I have a student who just needs need-based aid. And so you can see there exactly what happens. All of the ones that are just need-based pop up, and you can then kind of compare amounts and the percentages of students who get it. I really look for those large awards as well as a larger percentage. I'm kind of mean about it. I didn't realize how ridiculous my standards possibly are considered to other people until I was talking to some counselors, and I was like, well, they only offer it to 30%. You know, that's crazy. That's really low. You know, I really kind of go for the big ones. Next slide. Okay, then we're talking about the schools that are generous with merit, right? The family that comes to you and says, I don't know how they think that we can afford this. We cannot. So 48 of the schools in the chart offer an average award of over $20,000. And of the 46, you can see 36 are offering it to 30%, 33 are offering it to 50%. I like the 50% plus. And there's an additional 35 who offer average awards between 10 and 20,000. So very generous awards. Next slide. And you can just see here, it's another sort by merit. So learn how to sort, get the chart and learn how to sort. Those are my two messages today. Next slide. Okay, and then generous with need and merit. Okay, there are 156 of them in the chart. 30 have awards of 100% to international students, 100%, some will say 100% plus. 73 have awards of 30,000 and 19 have awards of 50,000 plus. My alma mater right there at the top, very proud of that. Those are my alumni donations going to good use. All of this is to say, I felt like when I started out in this profession, everyone's like, well, there is no money for international students. It's not true. It's a very restricted pot, but it's there. You just have to know where to look to find it. You can read the slides later because I know that we don't have tons of time and I'd like time for Q&A. Next slide. Which should just be, okay. So again, among the most generous, okay, you can see, you know, schools that you might not have thought of. And again, I also include the outliers. I think the outliers are really important. So many families have no idea of the small amount of money and the percentage. It's just, you know, sometimes I'm a little snarky in my meetings and I'm like, gee, well, like, thanks for the airline ticket, but that's kind of it. You know, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. You know, like books for 2 years, that's not going to work. Next slide, please. Okay, there we go. So there's that sort again, right? For both need-based and merit. Next slide, please. Okay, here's where you find the chart. Go on, you know, get the chart, download it, use that ED chart as well, right? For Joan's approach of using the rounds, because that's a separate chart. I probably should have included it, but basically what it does is it kind of lets you know the admit rate for the early decision. It's an overall, it's not an ED1, ED2, because very few institutions separate that out. But it'll also help you to make an informed decision, right? Lots and lots of strategy here, right? Look at the numbers. They do not lie. That's it. That's what I've got for you. Use it.
Jenny, thank you. Thank you so much. I know you were going really fast, but I think one thing I was realizing, Jason, if it's okay with you, we will send you some resources afterwards, because Jenny actually has a podcast on this, like with the essay guy, where she talks for, I think you talked for an hour, Jenny, about how to use your list. So people want to follow up.
Yeah, also with Apple Ruth, I've often done ones as well, and that's more of a presentation like this at a slower pace.
And then also we'll send out some things about concourse too, if that's okay. And we'll just shoot it out to everybody. We also wanted to say thank you to all of you, because most of you are actually still here. So we want to just say thank you for staying with us. We want to hear now from, and we'll stay on as long as we possibly can. I don't want to speak for Jenny and Joe, because I don't know what their schedules are. But I would like for us to definitely hear from Michael Obeng, because Michael's extraordinary. And Michael, I'd just like to give the floor to you, because now you're a second year at Hong Kong University. You are the first Ghanaian at Hong Kong University, first, best, only. So Michael, could you just take the floor and tell us a little bit about your experience and anything you'd like to say to the counselors here, because you're the student. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Liu. Thank you everyone for being here. I really appreciate this opportunity. And I'd say God bless you all for hopping on this this session, because I mean, to be a counselor, some people may look at it as a job, but I see every counselor as a God-sent angel, especially Ms. Liu, because the roles you guys play are not just, it's not just a job, it's more than being a counselor. It's being a mentor, it's being an advocate, and you're showing the true essence of humanity by taking other people's problems to heart and actually helping them. I don't think there's enough time for me to go into my full story, but a lot of things affected my applications. I wrote my SATs somewhere, I took them in October, November. So I was too late for early decision, the ED1. So I had to go regular. And after 1 year, a lot of people lose interest. You're not going to get a lot of pro bono help in Ghana. And so a lot of those things affected my applications. And I didn't know anything. I literally had to study on my own for the SATs. I had one doctor who helped me a lot, and he helped me to prepare for the SATs. He helped me with my application, but we literally knew nothing. And this is what I'd like to tell you, counselors, that when you're in touch with students, especially students who need a lot of financial aid, someone like me whose EFC is essentially just 0, you have to understand that we're looking for a way out. I remember on March 26th, that was the day a lot of the application decisions came out, and I remember just opening portals and closing them, opening and closing them. And at the point, I just go into a daze. It will all read, thank you very much, but we're sorry. Thank you very much, we're sorry. Thank you very much, we're sorry. And I sat down for hours thinking what I would do in my life, because I come from a family of 10 people. I mean, that's a lot of people. I mean, my parents included, that's 10, but that's a lot of people. And if one of the children is on a scholarship, that's definitely something that releases a burden on my parents. And so I was really confused. I'd really lost my path then. I always thank Mr. Akins Echo, who posted my credentials on the Facebook page. And then I got to Miss Liu. My whole point is we're very confused students. We're very young, we know nothing. And some students may never even see this video, but you counselors have these resources. You know about the financial situation. You know that if you're looking at my list, it was even a miracle.
I think we might have lost Michael there at a critical moment. Hopefully he'll come back. I guess in the meantime, while we're waiting for Michael to rejoin, I realize that we've overrun a little bit, and we did anticipate that we might overrun slightly. But thank you very much to everyone who's still hanging around. I think we've got quite a few questions that have been coming in. I wonder if Joan, Jenny, and Joe, you'd be happy to answer a few select questions if I read them out.
I'm happy to, certainly.
Great. I'm just going to pick a few interesting questions that are short enough for me to read. One here is, if an athlete wins an athletics scholarship, are they still able to apply for stacking other merit aid on top of that? So in other words, if you've got one type of scholarship, are you able to try and find other ones on top of that?
Jason, Michael is back. Would you mind if we held that in our brains for a second and let
Absolutely.
Michael speak? Yeah, thank you. Michael, welcome back.
Thank you, Ms.
Just
Liu.
for saying you were confused, and that's when we lost you.
Sorry. So we were confused, as I was saying, we were very confused because we don't know anything. Back in Ghana, it's all about the US. Everyone tells you, I mean, I had 15, 16, and everyone was like, just apply to all the Ivy Leagues, you definitely get in. So,
Oh no. Oh no.
Oh dear. Technical problems. We almost managed to join 4 continents together, but I'm sure Mike will be able to rejoin and finish what he was saying. While we wait for him, Joan, do you want to perhaps just talk on the idea of stacking merit scholarships together?
Okay, is the question, let me just, because I was a little bit distracted between the two, is basically the question, can you, in addition to an athletic scholarship, stack something on top of that?
Exactly.
Oh, Jenny, I'm going to need your help with this one, but not that I'm aware of. I mean,
as far as I know, institutions kind of set their own policy about stacking. So, you know, some schools I've seen stacking, others, you know, you don't. I mean, one of my big messages when I'm working, I have a lot of students who have, who are dual nationals, you know, and they'll have, and, you know, they'll be US students. And, you know, I always say, you know, keep in mind that that student loan is not going to come out of your portion of what you have to pay. You know, and if you get outside scholarships, even very often they don't allow stacking, you know, they take them, the college takes it out of the part that they're offering you. So I think it's on an institutional basis. But, you know, the athletes that I've worked with, I can't even tell you the ridiculously low scholarships that they've gotten. You know, they tend to be more the student who's using their sport to like launch them into a more selective university. So it hasn't been an issue.
yeah, I would also say that student athletes generally are, I mean, I know, for example, I have a colleague who works with student athletes in Zimbabwe who also need full financial aid. I mean, that would be very, very difficult. But most students who are in sports have some means in regards to like being able to play the sport, being able to pay into the sport. For example, fencing is a very expensive sport, you know, as is, for example, water polo. So, I mean, the students I've worked with in terms of being a student athlete have mainly gotten their student athletic scholarship if they're like, for example, D1. I've only had a handful of those kids in my life. And those scholarships have not been stacked. So I don't feel like I'm the authority on student scholarships, but my own experience is that they don't come stacked.
Great, thanks for that answer. A couple of questions here about the school profile. One person said it's well, one person's got a question about class rank, and in the UK we tend not to rank students in schools, and that's the case for other countries as well. Is that okay? Is the info in the school profile that we submit sufficient to demonstrate that a student is in the top cohort?
Okay, I'll take this question. I have a trick for you in regards to this. Okay, so you don't rank students. We also don't rank students. Most of the schools I've been at don't rank students, but in the counselor letter you can. So in the counselor letter, you can actually say this student, so I had an Armenian student in Turkey and she was #1 in the class. And the next student was 10 points behind her. So she was at a 95 and the next student was at an 85, which was highly unusual in the context of the school. So I simply said in the counselor letter, that exact thing. And I said, she's the valedictorian of the student. Now we don't rank, but did I disclose that in the counselor letter? And did I make sure I did that? Yes, I did. So don't rank, but then if you have a student who needs aid and it was to their benefit and it won't hurt another student, say it in the counselor letter is my advice. Jenny, what do you think?
I just wanted to say, I was so thrilled, Joan, when you said, you know, we spend hours working on our school profile. I cannot tell you the number of international students I've worked with whose schools do not have a school profile. And I work with the student and I help them cobble together information to build a school profile. And I say, take this, you know, everything from going on their website, looking at this, and And I say, you've got to build it yourself. And this is a gift that you're giving back to your community, because the student who follows you is now going to be in a much better position. So I say, take the profile, look at it with the head of school, see if they agree with it, see if they're willing to do this for you. School profiles are so critical.
And in addition to that, you can, as people go through your school and they visit your school, we used to ask people on the other side of the desk, hey, can you take a look at our school profile? Like, what do you think? Like, we have a whole ecosystem of feedback here that we can tap into. It's very easy to, or your recommendations. When I was a younger counselor, people would come into the office and be, hey, like, while you're waiting for your kids, can I just run this counselor letter past you? And people gave me advice on, like, the advice I gave you about sequencing was something that was given to me early in my career about the way in which I was sequencing the narrative. So feedback is out there. You want to kind of iterate with that.
Great.
It goes back.
Yeah.
An interesting question here about students that don't have a well-rounded profile, in particular not having any extracurriculars. And one person here has said that the hardest they find to advise are students who have an EFC of around $10,000 to $15,000, but have almost no extracurriculars. What sort of advice do you have for that sort of group?
Okay, 10 to 15?
Yeah.
Okay, let's say they're an extraordinary student, no extracurricular activities, non-US schools. Okay, look at Asia, like look at schools that are more credential driven, that don't require that second piece. In other words, look at schools that are more, remember that picture that we had of the ice skater and like the race being one? There are credential driven systems that are like the race being one, versus you've got to have this qualitative aspect to it. So in Asia, there's less of an emphasis on that. So think Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Korea, if they want to go abroad. Canada, in some cases, I would basically, that kind of kid, I'd put on Concourse. I put that kid on Concourse, put it on Joe's platform, and let things come to them. Their grades may be good enough for an automatic scholarship in Canada. I don't know, Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. I would recommend that a kid like that try Concourse. We have a lot of institutions that make offers primarily based on grades, so that'll be one layer of offers that can come in just for one profile. And then institutions that want to see more can ask for it on the platform. So that's the other thing about Concourse, is the assessment is a semi-interactive. So you have universities that might come to a student and say, well, that's interesting, and we think we have a program for you, but I need one more thing. Could you please upload it so we can complete our assessment? So it's a good way to just sort of see who's interested in you, who's got something that's roughly in your price range, and just cast a wide net. Just off the top of my head, I know some institutions like Southern New Hampshire University comes to mind that are rolling out very low cost programs to attract international students. Concourse might be a good platform to connect with institutions like that.
Great. And Joe, while we're talking about Concourse, there's a couple of questions here for you. One is, does Concourse only include US universities? I think you showed that there were other countries on there. What other countries do you have on the list? And is there a definitive list of which universities use Concourse?
Right. So yeah, we have many countries represented: US, Canada, UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, and then a couple of outliers. We have a few in Europe, just a handful really, but those are the main places where we have destinations, and more sign on every month. And yes, if anybody's interested in the exact list, we are happy to share it on request. Please just email me, joe@concourse.global. I put that into one of the questions. We don't make the list, we don't put it on our website, because we actually think it's not good for students to be able to get the list too easily, because then they'll start feeling disappointed if they don't get an offer from this institution or that one. And institutions come to Concourse and make decisions based on their own enrollment criteria at the time. So we feel like we want to be transparent with the information and share it with counselors, but we know the list is changing all the time. So we ask them to just, we'll send the list to anybody who asks, and just please be judicious about who you share it with.
Great, thank you. There's quite a lot of other questions here. I'm going to, if it's okay with everyone, I'm going to just tackle one more. There's a few questions related to it, and then we'll go back to Michael to finish off. There's a few questions about EFC and how you can calculate a student's EFC. And one person in particular said, if a student is applying to multiple countries. So Joan or Jennie, do you want to talk about how you actually go about calculating a student's EFC?
Okay, there's a form. The easiest way to do this, okay, this is a little bit of a roundabout but there's a form called the ISFAA. I know it's been discontinued, but it's a good form. It's an easy form to read. It's an easy form for students. Get an old copy of that and have the student fill it out. And the student actually has to say what they think that they are able to afford, okay? And that is how you start to calculate an EFC. There are other types of forms like the CSS profile that can help you also kind of calculate an EFC, but the EFC is generally coming from the family. So the family is estimating, they're doing a self-estimate. They're like, oh, maybe I can afford $5,000. Oh, maybe I can afford $2,000. Oh, maybe I can afford $20,000. And then what you want to do is look at the documentation and see if it makes sense. Just common sense wise, does it make sense? You don't have to be a financial aid guru. I mean, I am totally horrible at numbers, but I can look at a CSS profile and kind of be like, okay, this kid needs money or they don't. And so that's one way to kind of do it. I think the point that I'm trying to make in this presentation is to get some level of documentation. Like, don't just take the kid's word for it. I have had kids say to me, I need financial aid. And then I get the CSS profile and I see, this is no joke, everybody, that a family has spent $30,000 on entertainment. This is not a kid who needs financial aid. They want money, but they do not need it. So documentation. Jennie, would you like to add anything onto this?
Yeah. A big message I give families, universities are not here to finance your lifestyle, right? I have lots of families who they feel like they should be getting financial aid, but you know, if you belong to a country club and have a second home and are going on vacation, well, that's just kind of a question of priorities. I think a couple things that I would like to say, I like Joan's approach of like, just ask the student for some financial information and look at it, because the reality is that for a domestic student, it's quite easy to get a handle on their EFC, because they can go to the College Board and they can input data and they'll actually get a range. Also really important, so that nobody gets confused, along with the International Student Financial Aid application, the term EFC is also going away. So next year it's going to be the SAI, the Student Aid Index. So just keep that in mind. All the terms are changing. But I think that it's so hard for international students. And every time I speak with an institution, we're like, what does an international student do to figure it out? They're always like, yeah, no, that's a little bit rough. Two schools that have a great approach are the College of Worcester and Whitman. Whitman has a guarantee, like for domestic students, where you actually input all your data before you apply, and they say, if you are accepted for a domestic student, this is what your package is going to look like. I still think you can get a sense as an international student if you type your stuff in, like, okay, this is probably, close. And Worcester also has an early aid estimator. Again, they're not designed necessarily for international students, but I do think that they can be really helpful to get a baseline. But yeah, it's, like Joan said, in the role of a counselor, it's probably better to just kind of ask for some data and glance. It's part of the dictatorship of Joan's office.
Brilliant. Well, I know there are loads of other questions and we've massively run over. And again, thank you to everyone for joining. But I thought the best way to finish off would be to let Michael have the final word. So Michael, if you want to unmute yourself and let's see if you can get through without dropping off this time.
Really sorry for dropping off the first two times. Thank you, everyone. Sorry for overrunning, and thank you very much for joining. I'm pretty sure what Miss Joan, Miss Jennie, and Mr. Joe have said have really helped you all. I just want to say maybe a word of encouragement to you. I mean, I like I typed in the chat box, some of you are the closest things to true angels that we'll ever meet. Some of you will change the trajectories of the lives of a lot of individuals you come across. Some of you will forever be in the history books, in the lives of the students you help. And so even when it gets to the parts where you feel like you could easily give up and maybe let the student just apply to a school, he will definitely not get in or not be able to attend, I ask you to find that inner strength and push on, because we don't require only a counselor who's just going to give us a list and leave us. We need someone to motivate us. We need a mentor. We need an advocate. We need a friend. We need someone to speak to us when we come to a new country and nobody seems to understand what we say. We need someone to tell us, you got this. We need someone to say, it will be all right, because we are kids after all. We are young, we're confused, and we look up to you for motivation and for help and for strength. And so be strong for us, and God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for your words. And a very big thank you to Joan, and particularly for getting together Jennie and Joe for joining as well. I'm sure that everyone will agree that this session has been invaluable. I've learned an awful lot, and I've been scribbling away as everyone's been speaking, as well as trying to move the slides. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you again for everyone joining. We are going to send a follow-up email with those resources that we've described. I know there's been a lot of questions in the chat. I've been making note of them about anyone who wanted some particular questions answered about high school documents and those sorts of things. So we will be sending a follow-up email. And apart from that, I wish you a very good autumn/fall term, and I hope that all your students get in everywhere that they want to.
Jason, and a huge thank you to us, from us to you, for hosting us all. Also just want to say thank you to Jennie for all the manual work she does for all of us in the landscape in regards to helping us figure out where to direct students, and a huge thank you to Joe for his platform and flipping the script. Huge thank you to Michael for being an inspiration to us and also to his fellow students. And thank you to UES for hosting this really important session for this really important group of students. Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thanks, everyone, and goodbye.
Everyone.